Well, so good to see you again. This is great. I just listened to the first one and I'm like, wow, this is great. We got to keep going. This could be a series.
You know, the conversation does continue, and there's so
Hmm.
many places it could go. It's been such a pleasure to unwind it with you. And yeah, I would always welcome more. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. So this is our final installment for now, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it was a great setup. The previous two were great setups to this. And I think this is probably the most key because I think everybody wants to know how to lead like a futurist. And maybe you can enlighten us.
Yeah, I share your sense of like this is the most important one in the end. It doesn't matter how good the strategy or how good the idea, at the end of the day, if we aren't able to hold it and steward it through an organization, through change, through all kinds of complexity that comes up, it's the value doesn't retain itself.
Hmm.
So the thing about foresight that's so beautiful is that it does change us in what I refer to as the change literacy. It gives us a way to scan for change and what's emerging. It helps us know what to pay attention to, and we covered what to pay attention to in how to think like a futurist and that sweet little solving for X formula. The four forces tell us where to look. And yet, the whole purpose of doing foresight is so that we can make wise decisions about the future, that we have methods that allow us to think things through and to say, we believe based on all this is the right direction. And so we want to be able to do that for ourselves, that we, in a time of increasing, we're going to hear these same words, complexity and uncertainty and ambiguity, which is true. I mean, I shall just start with that. The one trend that I think is really here to stay is that of turbulence, and that learning how to, my phrase, dance with change as it emerges is one of the key competencies of this age.
Yes.
And we want to learn to be able to deal with the chaos that it brings up without becoming chaotic ourselves.
Hmm. So
So
is this sort of fall into the sort of boring term change management from a from a
there's
corporate
nothing
perspective?
boring about change, that's for sure.
But change management makes me think it just makes me think that you're trying to deal with change, at least from the corporate side of things. But it's
Mhm.
not just that, right? It's being able to initiate change of your own and try to manage that change to the organization as opposed to trying to manage change that's coming at you,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and it's a little bit of both. You have to filter the two in order to make good decisions.
Hmm.
And so this piece of wisdom, I think, is the most prominent and critical piece of it. That, in a sea of change, in a sea of all kinds of potentials, what's the right choice? And wisdom is what allows us to say, I can make a good choice and directionally right, even though there are no right answers.
Hmm. It's all
And
a percentage, right? It's like you can't say right or wrong. It's like this answer is better than that, but you can't actually. In fact, you don't even really know if it's better or not until you see the results of the decision.
the only way that we learn anything is by doing it. And
Right.
so the choice is about what are we going to invest in, because we have to determine what matters. And the same kind of zoomed out perspective that we take in foresight is exactly what we need. That's the very first step in cultivating wisdom, is that we step away from the tensions and stresses of our lives, the stories that come up inside of them, the conflicts that can get us really caught, all of which are real,
Hmm.
until you take it to another perspective and go, yeah, not so much. Right. And so
Right.
both are true at the same time. We want to care for what the concerns are, but also be able to release them And so wisdom has at its foundation a factor of humility, which kind of ties into what you were offering is we don't know how this is going to go. It is much of it is about how are we navigating mystery? How do we get
Right.
as smart about it as we can, understand the nature of it as well as we can, which in my view is understanding the nature of change itself, the nature of the issue that we want to address. Do we really understand it from a first principles point of view? It's only then where we get a sense of what really matters, and that wisdom wants us to, it's inherently driven towards the good. It is inherently focused on an ethical outcome, which says we want to bring the greatest good for the most people and wherever possible, reduce harm.
Right.
Because it acknowledges at the same time that, nothing is 100% good. There's always a cost. Whatever we do, there will be a cost. And so it asks us to calibrate and consider those costs too, without getting stuck in the resistances that say, but.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like we have to be very comfortable with ambiguity, and even ambiguity that doesn't necessarily lead to good outcomes, at least initially, because we don't know where things are going to go, but we have to take the best choice in front of us, I guess.
Yeah. And so the question is how do you feel comfortable with ambiguity? And there are ways to do that. So for me, the study of change gives lots of insights about what it means for us as individuals. And so if we understand that, change is many systems all at once, right? And that's not linear. And so applying linear thinking doesn't always work for us. Maybe in the short term it does, or in very specific transactional types of things of what to eat for lunch, right?
I'm not sure if it actually works ever, right?
Not really. I mean, not in the things that really matter. So if we understand that in complex systems of which we are a part in every moment, change is emergent.
Hmm.
And so what we want to do is get sensitive to the signals of change, just as we do with the four forces scanning for the signals of change in the environment. What are the signals of change internally? And these all occur at a very kind of visceral level.
Hmm.
The signals occur as crabbiness, joy, aliveness, energy, really being caught by something, that it could be a good kind of caught of like, I'm interested and I want to solve this. These are all the things that let us know how we're doing and how stable we are as well. For me, I recognize that when crabbiness, or I sometimes refer to it as crispiness, when you start to get a little burnt out, the edge and tone gets a little harsher.
Hmm.
There may be some resentment and judgment. I mean, in fact, there always is. It has an attitude that something's wrong here. There are two sides to something's wrong here. One is if you go up all the way to that full perspective, you realize it's just what's happening. There's actually nothing inherently wrong.
Hmm.
From that point of view, it all belongs, and that this is just kind of the path of our learning right now. That can be helpful. But the other truth about there's something wrong here is that there's information that there's something that's not working for me right now. And I recognize in my life and in other people's lives too, that very often the things that make us super high performers, we may really enjoy when we're in a flow state, at some point it expires.
Hmm.
Every chapter in our life ultimately expires, right? And the way that we know it's expiring is that it just doesn't quite fit anymore. And that's when we get crunchy,
Right.
crispy, right? So it's an
You can start feeling
opportunity.
the edges of things, right? And you go, I'm not. I'm. Yeah, it's uncomfortableness as well, right? It's
Totally.
we're pushing ourselves out of our zone, or we're pulling ourselves into our outside of our where we're comfortable.
We're hoping for, I mean, the thing we're always reaching for, it seems, is that we want to be stretched. We all want to be stretched.
Well,
We want,
we hope people want to be stretched. There's some people who don't want to be stretched,
I think,
unfortunately.
yeah, that I suppose you're right. But most people want some kind of learning in their life.
Mhm.
They don't want to just be doing the same thing.
Yep.
Something that says I can take, I like being on this edge. People's edges are in different places, but I like being
Hmm.
on this edge because when I'm there, I'm really engaged. And I'm finding and discovering new parts of myself as I'm discovering new things about the world or the issue or the science or whatever it is that we're working on. So when we stop feeling stretched is typically when we start to say, it doesn't work for me anymore.
Hmm.
So
Well, I
those,
think that's what
yeah,
you mean by dancing with change, right? Because you're on the edge of it, and it's playful in the best way. It's actually playful when you can sort of play around with it and test the edges and actually be surprised and deal with it and and if you step back from that and you stay away from the edge, then it starts getting boring.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes the crabbiness is that this does, I'm done with this. I'm done with
Hmm.
the learning in this arena of my development. And in fact, I'm starting to be pulled towards something else. So those signals that don't necessarily have answers to them are something's expiring here. It's no longer a fit. Typically, we negotiate with those circumstances for a while, which is perfectly appropriate. Do I need to change my perspective? Maybe I do. Maybe this is
Hmm.
part of the learning for me. Let me take that on as my edge. Do I need to address things? Maybe I do. Let's do that. Can we reconfigure it? You do everything that you can. And then typically, if it still doesn't shift enough, there comes a point where we say, I have to rescue myself. I really can't
Hmm.
do this any longer. And this happens in all places of our lives, is that it no longer fits. And remember, our theme throughout all of this is that we are wanting to find our fit because evolution asks us to,
Right.
right? Whether we're an organization and we're talking about our brand in the market, we have to find that fit. We have to find a relevance for our own development as well. And so that's this idea of fit and fitfulness is
Hmm.
really, part of where we get some of those signals of change. And then on the other side of that is, where are we growing? Where are we alive? Where are we just saying, that's so cool? And you find yourself completely lost in it. And those, you may not know what it means. Like very often people go, so what am I supposed to do with it? And it's like, don't know. We begin to allow things to emerge as they get clearer and clearer over time. And so part of living with ambiguity is also understanding, this is certainly a principle I live with, is that when things aren't clear, they're just not clear. And then when
Well,
clarity
some people can't
becomes clear,
stand that when things aren't clear, and I'm like, that's the state of the world.
yes,
Unclearness, like. Mhm.
it's really true. But if you have your eyes trained on where your next edge is, you can start to develop what you're trusting in the midst of ambiguity, a lack of
Mhm.
clarity, or even stressors. At least I know that if where I am developing is being fed, I can trust it enough that over time something new will emerge because that's what nature and change are all about.
Right.
So these become really nice constructs to give us some faith in the process,
Mhm.
listening deeply and trusting what's expiring and trusting what's emerging.
I love the analogy to product market fit. It's
Mm.
almost like human world fit. Like, how do I fit into the how do I fit into the world? How can I change myself? Because human beings are not static. How can I change my behaviors to fit into the world better?
Well, at its core, everything needs to be valued, right? And we are evaluating constantly. Is this
Hmm.
worth my time? Is this worth the calories? Is it worth the investment that I'm about to make in it? Is that relationship worth? Like we are constantly evaluating. because that is kind of the currency of finding fit,
Hmm.
right? So
We're also
finding,
evaluating ourselves against things that are constantly changing. So that it's a moving
yeah.
target.
But if we can learn to dance with it and enjoy the dance as a way of following where value happens, now we're onto something. And that's how we study ourselves in an unsteady environment.
Right.
That's what it means to dance with change as it emerges. And um, doing so gives you the tools in the simplest of ways to be able to sustain a lot of discomfort when it's there, or kind of anxiety that says I'm supposed to do something,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And when knowing what to do is not clear yet, unless a decision is required and you make a decision, but you are also going to invest in, and now we'll learn from that, right?
Yeah. Do you ever have these kinds of situations where you have sort of leadership going, this is not what I intended? So they try to make things go the way they intended, but the world is telling them, no, this is not the way things are going. And there's conflict there
Well, yeah.
all the time, right?
You know, what's interesting about that is that one of the ways it's occurring to me right now where I see that type of behavior, it can be like we're going to, continue to ride this project even though, because somebody's so invested in it, that can happen. I find it also happens when there's a lack of clarity about why we're doing what we're doing.
Hmm.
And very often what fills in the gap there, when we're absent of a really clear, purposeful why, is that people make up really fancy hype.
Hmm.
Oh, it's about growth and everybody feels this way. And, and so I find that often is where people double down on trying to sell something they haven't figured out.
Right.
That I think is probably the thing I see most often. Taking the time out to do the let's think it through and ask ourselves again, why are we doing it? What's the business problem we're solving? What's the value that it can have? Is it the right decision right now? Let's consider all of those things and find either the big, bold decision that we're going in for these reasons, but we really can stand by them and we've got a case for it. Or the small incremental experiments that help us test it as we go. Sometimes because the hunch is just so you can't argue with it. It's like this is right, and I actually don't know it yet, but it's strong enough that we have to do this at least in some safe boundaries.
Yeah. And there are ways of experimenting. You see, that's the other thing that's interesting today is that I think we're in an interesting period where you can test things in a low cost, low time way to see if they will fly. Whereas before we couldn't do that. Or
Mm.
maybe we were just so concerned that it had to have an ROI, it had to have this. We needed to prove the return ahead of time. But there's been so many new products out there that don't necessarily do that and become something that's incredibly innovative and take off later. But there's no specific ROI day one.
True. And this is interesting because I would say that another thing that I experience a lot is sometimes people are just doing things because it's keeping up,
Hmm.
right? We got to do this, we have to do, and so
Or it's fun, right? Oh, I'm in the innovation group. I'm going to bring in all the toys and play with them, even though
yeah.
they don't even apply to my job.
And there's, as long as you're clear about why you're doing and what you believe the value to be in its return, the value can be learning, it can be experimentation in and of itself. But
Hmm.
you have to be very clear about that and not um, chase things
Right.
just for the sake of chasing them. Uh, Purpose ideally is a filter for what to say no to
Hmm.
and doing the right work for the right reasons. And some of that may include a value around experimentation. Um, I've often encouraged people to take on what I call the 5% rule there. And that means that any big project, 5% of your time and budget. And I've always said it could be 0.05. I don't care. Just make sure that you're clear that in the process of doing or pursuing this project or initiative, you know you're going to be coming up against some, we don't know enough about this yet. We didn't expect this. We've uncovered something. And each one of those requires time to step back and think it through again.
Right.
And those, I'm now going to, and that is not a brainstorm or a meeting, by the way. It's
Hmm.
it really is time to really do a little bit of research, to maybe do some field trips, to have some experiences, do whatever it is that is going to unlock that next piece of understanding. And so I don't see that happen often enough where in your budget, and I do think it's important to have it as a line item
Hmm.
because it gives people permission to do that when it comes up, and that you have some money to do that as well, that it's really critical. So that allows you to really pursue the learning without feeling, people are like, we've got to have this deliverable by.
Right. Well, if you think about it, I mean, that's a little bit in agile methodology, where at the end of the sprint, whether it's 1 week or 2 weeks, you have a retrospective and you go back over it and go, are we still going in the right direction? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to make changes? So not only do you need the budget for it, you also need the time specified to say, now, let's make sure that we focus on, we look at it again, it's zoomed out or zoomed in and go, are we still going in the right direction? And if we're not, what do we need to do?
And if we don't know yet, to allow that to be a valid set of feedback. We
Right.
don't know yet. And then, is it worth pursuing? And so those are interesting conversations for sure. Um, and they're, again, the same principles that apply to us personally, right? And our ability to give things the time that they need to be seen and for things to become clear. And living with a lack of clarity is part of the job for a while. It really is. And I think it's helpful for us sometimes in a business setting to remember that we know that to be true from our own direct experience.
Hmm.
We can look into our lives to understand what change really is. We all have been through a lot of it. And we can understand the times when we've been through sometimes very big reinventions, what it's taken to do that, to stand in a place where I don't know what's next. I just know that I have to leave or I have to do this or pursue it, whatever, but I'm figuring it out.
Hmm.
And we know what we pulled from during those times. And it's really important to see that those are the types of things that we want to cultivate in leadership very directly. You know, competencies and job skills, are yes, those are just table stakes. You have to, of course, learn to be a good communicator. You have to take other people's perspectives. You have to be able to encourage people to belong. You have to, create a narrative, and you have to be able to have good planning and know how to delegate, like all those things. Yes, you have to do that. But it's the internal work that develops the capacity to have the space for change that people really all participate in. This is where belonging matters most of all, is the ability to have space for that discovery.
Hmm.
And, it's talking about what's expiring and what's emerging. For me, I've learned that it comes down to a very simple navigational tool, and it's embodied in this little thumb.
That's why this symbol is so powerful.
Yeah, it's, you know, I learned, because otherwise what happens when we are up against something that's challenging, we can feel the wheels turning, and it can keep us up at night, and we have lots of conversations and we try to get the strategy right. And sometimes it's a knot in here. And what I've come to realize in my own life anyway, is that anytime that I'm in a circumstance that for too long of a time has me spinning here in knots and
Hmm.
my gut in knots, that I take the information to say it's not working.
Right.
Right.
You leverage your intuition instead of ignoring it.
Yes, and just to see that this is the symptom of the situation, it is telling you it's not working.
Right.
And so a knot is a knot. And that instead
A
we
knot
all
is a knot with a K as well as with
correct.
no
Yeah.
K.
Yeah. Yeah. A little play on that. So that we also know equally that when we are on, it's like a total thumbs up. We don't argue with, like it's all gone,
Yeah.
right? And life isn't like that all the time, but we know that that's what we're navigating towards. So in my own life, I have a commitment that I pursue the relationships, the environments, the work, the clients, the exchanges, the adventures, where it's like yes.
Hmm.
And I don't always know why or where it's taking me, but I know that that is my guiding mechanism. And that over time, it starts to reveal often a theme of development of like, yeah, that's what's next for me. I've been feeling it for a while, and now I can name it. And now I can advocate for it. I can look
Hmm.
for where that fit now comes. And those are those periods of transition that actually go on for sometimes a very long time and do ask us to be patient while we're just doing this. And, when it's less than a thumbs up, we have to negotiate a little bit and make decisions about that. So I do think those visceral, or as you said, intuitive signals of change are primary.
Hmm.
They're absolutely primary. Then
Yeah,
there's
I don't understand why we discount them so much, because I think that's part of our wiring is that these signals are telling us something, right? They're telling us something, and we're ignoring them, and we're like, we probably shouldn't, not fully ignore them, right?
yeah. And maybe a part of that too is just to recognize that we are conditioned to think that if we work hard enough, achieve enough, that we will somehow be exempt from suffering.
Hmm.
Right? If I can just, solve this issue, whether it's kind of my personal issue or an issue in my life, if I can there's the if only statements that we make to ourselves all the time, because underneath it is a hope that what we can do is finally win our way into a state where it's all gravy.
Hmm.
And that's not true. We will never exempt ourselves from exactly this work. And frankly, the higher up the chain and the ladder you go and the responsibilities you are, the harder it is to do. You're not sure who you're answering to anymore or what's right anymore. Um, it's hard. The pressures are really, really intense. And so cultivating this and that intuitive feel becomes really critical. Yes, you have to know how to read the data. Have to know how to read people. You have to know how to do all of those things. And at the end of the day, you are making hard decisions that require your deepest wisdom on this subject, which at some point is an ethical orientation based on all of your consideration. This is what I think we can live with.
Right.
And
And then
really looked around.
as time goes by, are you building unconscious competence towards that? So things,
Yes.
and that's another thing about intuition is that as you learn more and more, it gets subsumed within yourself and it becomes an unconscious thing. So when you feel the intuition, maybe it's because you've learned something in the past that you may have forgotten about, but it's now resurfacing itself in a feeling or a sense that something is wrong or something is amiss or something should go this way instead of that.
We have all kinds of information inside of us. And we never know the whole thing, but we know enough to take the next step.
Hmm.
And whatever that next step is going to give us more. And so it is that kind of deep fascination with learning and growing. I think that's the critical piece, is that we have to be deeply interested in learning and growing more than anything else, more than any outcome that we can't know anyway.
And learning and growing is a natural human thing, as far as I'm concerned. Even though some people don't seem to exhibit it as much as others, as far as I'm concerned, that's how we're built. If we don't learn and grow, I mean, where do we go?
Correct. And it's more than human, it's just nature,
Mm.
right? This is what life does. Life asks us always to kind of get a little bit more sun, right? Or to seek more nutrients, or somehow to have some advantage for our own development. That is the whole um, drive of the life force in
Hmm.
any living thing and in our world around us. And it's embodied in us to do that. It is the requirement of being alive. And we all know that if we don't do that, we do suffer. And, it's a hopeful view to believe that there may be some choice in it. Suffering is suffering and it's real.
Hmm.
But some of it may be something that we can begin to choose a path out of by paying attention to those really basic raw signals. There's always an ember of aliveness with us, no matter how dark the days. There's always a part of us that knows what joy feels like and has something in our life that makes us smile or picks up our eyebrows and go, oh, that's interesting.
Hmm.
And that's all information about who we are and who we are yearning to be further developed, who we are becoming. And if we can hook our train to that, we can find our way out of sometimes very dark times with the right support and the right guidance. But that faith is fundamental.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the emperor is always there, but sometimes we just can't see it for everything else that's going on around us.
Or we tell ourselves that that's what I believe. I believe that sometimes we get so lost in the darkness, frankly, sometimes the pity or the sense of like it's not fair or I'm a loser or whatever it might be, that we stop listening or acknowledging, like the story becomes consuming.
Hmm.
So like this is impossible and I'm sinking. And yet, if we pay attention, we can start to see, no, there's light in there too. It's not only dark,
Right.
right? Um, so I would say, that idea of being able to take perspective and go all the way out to see what's happening from an observant point of view. Forgive me, I had forgotten to turn on my focus mode. So instead of having all those interruptions, I'm interrupting us right now. So here we go.
That's all right.
Yeah. Um, anyway, I was here, I believe.
Yes, you were up here.
Well, I was up here.
You were zoomed out.
I zoomed out. Whoa. And the beautiful thing about that is that, down here, things feel so personal. Up here we go, it's not personal.
Hmm.
It's not personal. You know, everything's all right. So the perspective taking is really important. This idea of thumbs up, what's emerging and what's expiring is really very critical. And then there are things that we can cultivate. And these are all kind of the light things, but profound at the same time. The developmental work that I do in a program I have that's Lead Like a Futurist goes into much more, but the simple things that are available for all of us also occur in how do we shift our states. If we have the facility for shifting our states and maybe pulling up and out when we can, it makes a huge difference. So we have the ahs, and ahs remind us, they take us into this space, this kind of vertical space. And one of them is AWE, awe,
Hmm.
of wonder, like, that place where we just go, I'm speechless.
Mm.
There is no language for this sense of being entranced and captivated by something so mysterious and beautiful at the same time. whether it's looking at stars or gazing into the eyes of, a loved one, a puppy or a flower or whatever it may be, that awe expands us back into the state of let's remember. And it can shift us beautifully. There is also, awe, awe, when we're moved, we are moved out of our own story. We are moved into connection. We are moved into going, yes, my heart is beating deeply. It's, beauty is here right in front of me. Humanity is here right in front of me, and not just in front of me, within me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a beautiful book that I have loved called Tattoos on the Heart, written by Gregory Boyle, who is a Jesuit priest who started Homeboy Industries in South Central LA. And it's, many people have profiled him, and his book is called Tattoos on the Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, when he's confronted with people who are going through a hard time, and it really makes that connection. He says, there is kinship, and I am returned to myself.
Mm.
Right? And so, awe does that for us. We're back into, these are all the things where we're reminded of what really matters. Another form, the third awe, is the one that goes, aha, right? Aha. And that aliveness is so exciting. I see it.
Mm-hmm.
At some moment it was, a conversation that I had that make it go, boom, it's the last piece of information that crystallizes. And suddenly you're again in that place of, it's so cool.
Mm.
We are back in our aliveness, our sense of agency, our sense of yes, I think, I know, I want. This is cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth is the one that goes, joy is so critical
Mm-hmm.
for cultivating the spaciousness I'm talking about. How do we deal with the stressors and the pressures? How do we make good decisions? We have to have space first. And being able to know, I call these hinges into that vertical space, to intentionally seek wonder and be alert for it, for, compassion, for insights, wherever you can, feed yourself so that you're continuing to you can feel the crackling of your synapses.
Mm-hmm.
And then just straight up joy. We are reminded, we are returned to ourselves, and we can deepen who we are and how we see and what we feel and what we listen to, because these are our navigational tools in times when we can't follow anything in the external environment. Less and less. We have to follow what's in here.
Right.
So these help to cultivate that.
So how do you go to that state if it's not natural for you? If people were stuck in this unnatural state where they don't feel the joy, they don't see the awes, how do you get to that state? How do you help yourself get to that state if you need to?
Again, I think it starts with a commitment. Do I want to feel better?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to feel unstuck? Do I care about, doing, just feeling different than I do? I mean, I think it always starts there. I want to feel different. And often attached to this, I want to do more, be more. But it starts with, I want to feel differently. And so if there's a commitment to that, and ultimately a faith that I can, then you make it a practice.
Mm-hmm.
All these things are practices. Seek the things that are awe-inspiring and carry an attitude of great appreciation. Because when you do appreciate that, frankly, mystery, awe, magic is around us, you can turn to the smallest of things. The peeling of an orange, the burst of it in your mouth, the trickle down your throat, the extraordinary thing that it even exists,
Hmm.
and that, like all that, like that it came to you through all the many hands that held it. That's awesome,
Yeah.
right? It really is. So we can discover awe all around us if we begin with an attitude of appreciation first. And I think that's, how we do it. And then we choose to. We really choose to. We choose to. There was a friend some time ago who said, I don't think I'm depressed, but I just that again restlessness. I just feel everything's fine, But she was casting for a reason
Mm.
about why something's wrong. And I said, I think you might just have a joy deficit.
You can have that.
Everything's fine, but what experiences might you want to put on your menu that, just take you to that place of joy? They remind you. Because everything else is actually okay, in her
Hmm.
life. It was totally, there was nothing wrong other than we have to attend to it. We have to source joy in our life. And we all know that there are certain activities that will do that and or can try some new ones out. I took up singing 5 years ago, as a rank beginner, because I love
Wow,
the.
you were playing piano in the last show, now you're singing.
Well, I
What's
started
next?
singing first, and piano was only to help me with my singing.
Okay.
In my case, it's because I've always wished I could. And I just woke up one Saturday morning and said, okay, Sommers, let's do this.
Hmm.
And it's hard. And you look bad because I sound bad and all, but the interest in it, I know enough to know that I'm a good learner. And I know enough about learning to know that it takes a lot of time. So I'm willing to risk being bad for a long time because the joy of learning supersedes it.
Hmm.
And frankly, then the joy of singing is the whole place. So now I participate in choirs and it's like joyful, like
Nice.
instantly, right? So we can source joy for ourselves and sometimes maybe risk embarrassment, whatever it may be, but do something new. Often something new can be like, wow, that was great.
Yeah, I
And
don't think I can sing though because my tonsils are out and I'm flat as a pancake. So
yeah,
gotta find
everybody
something
can
else.
sing. Here's the thing that I truly believe. We all have many undeveloped potentials. And
Hmm.
because they're undeveloped, we're bad at it, period.
Yeah.
We have to accept that. But if we want to experience that dormant potential within us, we can awaken it. We
Hmm.
have to engage with it. But, anyway, so yes, seek joy. It's really important. And yeah, we can seek laughter and pleasure and do all of those things. And then we can also feed ourselves. What are the intakes of, you know, podcasts and readings and things that stimulate us and make us remind us, oh, that's who I am. That's who I
Hmm.
am. And I'm sparkling.
And also don't forget creation at the same time. I mean, you're consuming,
Totally.
but all this consumption has to lead to something, and usually it leads to creating something brand new.
Yeah. And it could be, a meal that you want to make. It could be a trip that you want to take. It could be a bicycle ride. There's so many things that it could be. It's all could be because it's everywhere. At some point, you just choose and do that. So these become awarenesses about, yes, I can cultivate this because this is the knob that I get to turn
Hmm.
when I want to have, capacious, kind of the spaciousness, the capacity for space. Um, I think the other thing around wisdom is, yes, it has humility as its foundation, but it also has curiosity.
Mm.
And so you have to follow your interests. Study the things that intrigue you. This is, the things we care about. We want to like pound our fists on a table. And one of the ones for me is I wish people would study the things that they really believe and care about,
Mm.
rather than just having opinions or getting angry.
Yeah.
Or or the opposite of feeling like we've got the answer. It's like, no, just study it really, really deeply. Go deeply into the things that you care about. That's the only way that we can, that discernment is available to us if we actually know what we're talking about, and not from a place of expertise, but because we've gotten to know, again, I think I have a sense for what's working here, and my senses tell me what's right,
Mhm.
because I've been with it long enough, not because I'm an expert, but just because I've become intimate with this. But I'm never done.
Yeah.
The wisdom is never, ever, ever done.
No, it never is, because there's always more.
There's,
There's always more to learn.
there's always more to learn. And, then finally, kind of as practices, and I always suggest these as daily practices, are 4 habits of mind.
Hmm.
They can be somewhat of a checklist, in the morning, let's say, where the habit of mind, the very first one, is optimism.
Mm.
Similar to what I had said about appreciation. Now, optimism is what it holds for us is an understanding that I can see and do make good of anything. Whatever presents itself to me, I can make good of this. It's not happening to me, as they sometimes say, it's happening for me.
Hmm.
And if I choose to see it that way, indeed it will be, right?
Yeah.
So optimism always says, whatever is going on, I'm going to make good of this. And that's pretty critical. So anytime we're challenged or stuck, that can shift us. The next habit of mind is curiosity.
Hmm.
And once again, typically when we are challenged or we're presented with something new, this happens in innovation all the time. It happens organization all the time. We say we want something big, bold, new, different, best, and you present it to them, they go, but it's not what we do. The resistances come up right away, the buts, right? But this will never work, but we've done this before, but is that really different enough? But what's it going to take to do it? And so instead of indulging the fear, which is what buts are all about, because we resist, we recoil physically when we come up against novelty or something we don't like.
Hmm.
And we go into a posture of, ew, it's not right. Something's not right here.
It's unfamiliar.
It's unfamiliar. I don't like it. Again, physically, the embodied state is, I don't like it. So when we are up against something we don't like, we have to intentionally say, all right, I'm going to choose to be curious, and instead lean forward and say, okay, tell me more.
Hmm.
Let me learn about this. Let me inquire. Let me look inside. Let me study the situation. Let me try to hold my judgment at bay for a little while. So I refer to that as moving from ew to ooh. Right? So these are attitudinal shifts that we can take around anything that we're feeling stuck.
Mm.
The third one is courage. And courage, I think we have it, that it looks heroic and bold, and that when people are courageous, there's no fear involved. And I tend to think of courage actually as a state which allows fear to be present,
Mm.
and in fact is tender towards the fear rather than thinking it's wrong. It says, I feel you, I get you, I'm going to put my arm around you, and we're going to do this anyway. And we may only do a small piece of it, but good for you. Courage is something that we can enact in small ways every day in our lives. And once again, if we are in a situation that confronts us or that is confusing, let's spin the optimism in. Let's get curious about it. And where can I be courageous? And the last of the 4 habits of mind is patience.
Mm.
Because change, which is what we're talking about the nature of change and how it gives us signals of where it's heading in the environment, again, through the 4 forces as a scanning model, or from within ourselves, the up and down ideas, or, what we lean into, all of those visceral signals of change are telling us we need time. If change is emergent, and it is, then we wait for the clarity to come. And that can be very hard in a business, setting.
Oh yeah, it's almost impossible.
It's almost impossible
to preach patience and have it listened to.
It's really true, and that but even being patient with the fact that there's low tolerance for patience is important.
That's right.
Yeah. You may not get the long-term horizons on a particular project, but you can get the long arc of shifts in people, in organizational change, and say, okay, well, not this time on that one, but the longer arc is the one to really train your sights on.
Yeah. And I think that's part of having a longer term view anyway, because we're so stuck into the short term view. That's what drives our impatience. But if we can push the view out further, then we can actually be more patient.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is kind of the foundational work of what it means to lead like a futurist. Other elements are, I conduct a program called Designing for Gravity, which is really about systems and understanding how systems are built and the ways that they behave, so that when we engage with them, we can make, again, wise decisions about where to apply interest in change while also accepting what it can and can't do. The Future is Where We Belong is another one, which is all about belonging, that kinship feeling, and what it takes to do that. And to build that capacity is really critical. Leading with questions, which is really about first principles thinking, which, again, as I was stating, is critical for wisdom. It is absolutely vital that we always unpack something before we make any decision and really get to understand the nature of what we're talking about, so that we can build it back up in a different way if we choose to. And another, which is power and humility. And then lastly, the more human leader, which is one that has a bias towards wisdom in an age of increasing intelligence, and which is so needed. There's such a deficit of wisdom. And as AI and the pace of change encroach on our reasoning, and they do, and as they begin to manipulate our emotions and our reasoning, we have got to really invest ourselves in this capacity for wise thinking and wise action. And this is a long-term, deep practice. That is what leadership is really about.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. If someone wants to get in touch with you and get more information, what's the best way?
You can find me on my website. My name is my handle everywhere, CecilySommers.com, LinkedIn, Cecily Sommers, Facebook, Cecily Sommers, or email Cecily@CecilySommers.com.
I love it. Well,
and
thank you so much.
All interesting conversations are welcome. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll put the contact information in the show notes. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, they can go directly to you. So thank you so much. This has been great.